Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. We have folks here from 50 countries joining my dear friend Ray Kurzweil, my co-founder of Singularity University, and myself for 90 minutes of fun conversation, pal.
Sounds great.
We're going to talk about the next, I'd like to talk about the time frame of the next 25 years, the countdown to the singularity, all the exponential technologies. We have amazing questions that you've given us. Let me just...
25 does not get us to the singularity.
Well, it gets us close.
It's 28.
It gets us close. It gets us close. I mean, believe me, at 25, I'm going to be like it's going to be magic. Let me welcome the Abundance Digital community. Welcome to my community members. An honor and a pleasure to have you here with me. Welcome to the Singularity University community and to Futurism. All of you who are Futurism fans like I am, welcome and a pleasure to have you guys here. So let me tell you the format, introduce myself, then properly introduce Ray Kurzweil. So the format is Ray and I are going to chat for about 30 minutes. I have, even though I get to see you all the time, I have a lot of questions to ask you that I'd like to ask for my community members. Then we'll actually go into a Q&A with you. And ask us and we'll do our best to answer your hardest questions. I like to think about dangerous ideas because of the magnitude of what we're playing with. So very quickly, my background is a serial entrepreneur of now 19 companies focused in space and longevity and grand challenges. The author of 2 New York Times bestsellers, Abundance, The Future is Better Than You Think. The name came from Ray, and also Bold, How to Go Big, Create Wealth, and Impact the World. Very proud to be the co-founder of Singularity University, the executive chairman of the X Prize Foundation, and amazing companies like Human Longevity, Cellularity, Planetary Resources. And I love, and part of my massively transformative purpose is helping entrepreneurs like you really figure out how to go big and impact the world. So we'll be talking more about those things. Let me do a proper introduction of Ray, who's got one of the most awesome bios that I know. I actually had this probably memorized, pal, since we've had a chance to do so many gigs together, but let me just take a second and read it. So Ray Kurzweil is one of the world's leading inventors, thinkers, and futurists. He has a 30-year track record of accurate predictions. If you go to Wikipedia, I think your prediction rate is like 86%, 87%?
86% of the 147 predictions I made in the 1990s, about 2009, were correct.
Yeah, amazing. You've been called the relentless genius by the Wall Street Journal, the ultimate thinking machine by Forbes. You were selected one of the top entrepreneurs by Inc. magazine, described as the rightful heir to Thomas Edison, not too shabby. PBS selected you as one of the 16 revolutionaries who made America. Ray was the principal inventor of the first CCD flatbed scanner, the first OmniFont optical character recognition, the first print-to-speech reading machine for the blind, the first text-to-speech synthesizer. There's a pattern here. There's the first music synthesizer capable of recreating the grand piano and other orchestral instruments, and the first commercially marketed large vocabulary speech recognition. Among your many honors, you've received the Grammy Award for Outstanding Achievements in Music Technology. You're the recipient of the National Medal of Technology, inducted into the National Inventors Hall of Fame. You hold 21 honorary doctorates. That's not too shabby. And been honored by 3 U.S. presidents. You've written 5 national bestsellers, including New York Times bestsellers, The Singularity is Near, which I loved and became the basis really for us collaborating and launching Singularity University. We're here, you're also written How to Create a Mind. We're here at Google headquarters recording this. This is you actually got a day job. Your first day job.
I do, it's my first job. It's going pretty well.
Yeah, it's going pretty good. And you're director of engineering here at Google, and you head up a team, actually it's been an exponentially growing team, developing machine intelligence and natural language processing, understanding. You're on my board at the X Prize Foundation, and most importantly for me, you're the co-founder and chancellor of Singularity University.
That's been great.
Yeah, and a member of the Abundance 360 team, and you'll be at Abundance 360 this coming January.
Yeah,
we're gonna have a lot of fun.
Looking forward to that.
Yeah, we talk about the collision of artificial general intelligence, nanotechnology and brain-computer interface. I mean...
Yeah, I think the word general is not needed.
Okay.
That was an inherent criticism by people that felt that AI was not actually working on AI. But I actually think we'll get to general intelligence by mastering all of these narrow fields, and the narrow skills are getting broader and broader until there really won't be a difference between artificial and natural intelligence. But it's not an alien invasion of AI from Mars. We're gonna
build it ourselves.
Well, we're gonna make ourselves smarter by merging with it.
So we'll talk about that. A lot of questions about when we're going to connect our neocortex to the cloud. Also, some questions about, is there alien life out there? I know you and I have a debate about that, so we might talk about that a little downstream. One of the things I've been looking at is that the rate of accelerating change is actually accelerating in many ways, and there are interesting factors driving that. And what do you think about that?
Yeah, well, I mean, the law of accelerating returns is that the price, performance, and capacity of information technology grows exponentially, not linearly. That sounds simple. I'm sure this audience is aware of the difference between linear and exponential growth, but it's quite profound. That's behind the disruption that we're seeing. And people think linearly, and the critics who are diminishing of these viewpoints just think it's obvious things will be linear. 7 years through the Genome Project, we did 1%. So it was obvious it was going to take 700 years.
To sequence the human genome, right?
Right. But in fact, it continued doubling every year and was finished 7 years later. That's continued since the end of the Genome Project. You're involved, for example,
my
with
company,
HLI.
We're sequencing a genome now for $1,000 in half a day.
Yeah, so that's actually a millionfold improvement since the one we finished in 2003, which cost $1 billion.
Yeah.
And every other aspect is growing exponentially. But the rate of exponential growth, the exponent, has increased slowly. It took us 3 years to double the price performance of computation in 1900, 2 years in 1950, 12 months in 2000, it's now down to 11 months. So there's a slow second exponent. But one level of exponential growth is good enough. That exponential growth is leading to an increase in the paradigm shift rate.
Yeah. Let's talk about paradigm shift rate, because it's not just the acceleration of tech, especially for entrepreneurs, it's new business models. Yeah. And it's the convergence of technologies that make things interesting.
Hundreds of years ago, your grandparents lived the same lives you did, and you expected correctly that your grandchildren would do the same. That began to be disrupted around 1800, starting in the textile industry in England. When all these machines came along, business models were uprooted from the technology. This guild of weavers that had passed down this business model of having a family business of weaving cloth was suddenly disrupted. And it led to a perception, oh my goodness, all employment's going to go away, which in fact it did, but we invented new jobs. How many jobs circa 1900 exist today? So we have eliminated all human employment several times, and yet we nonetheless have actually more people as a percentage of the population working today than ever before. Jobs pay 11 times as much in constant dollars per hour than they did a century ago. So we can talk more about employment, but yes, business models are based on the current technology. They're all technology based, and as the technology changes, the business models change.
So I'm thinking about the acceleration that we're about to go from, we have about 3.8 billion people connected on the planet today. And that will be within the next decade with Loon, with SpaceX, with OneWeb.
So that was 2 billion just a couple of years ago.
Yeah, it was 1.8 billion in 2010, 3.8 now. And we'll probably hit 8 billion connected people. And so, but these 4 billion new minds are not coming online like you and I did at 9600 baud at AOL. They're coming online with a gigabit. And so I think one of the things that's going to accelerate speed of acceleration is more brains using more tech.
Yeah, more brains and more powerful tools and more access to information. So this gal who buys a smartphone for $75 in Africa has access to all of human knowledge and extremely powerful information tools, which, by the way, counts as zero economic activity because it's all free.
The economics are broken today, aren't they?
Yeah. So, I mean, I had an on-stage dialogue with Christine Lagarde, head of the International Monetary Fund, at their annual meeting, and she said, yes, it's amazing what you can do with digital technology, but how come we don't see any gains in productivity? And I said, that's because you put it in the numerator and the denominator. So that $75 smartphone is $75 of economic activity, despite the fact that it's literally $1 trillion of computation and communication circa 1965, $1 billion circa 1980, and has millions of dollars of free information apps, like an encyclopedia that's much better than the one I saved up for years as a teenager to buy. And all that counts for nothing.
Yeah.
So we basically don't count it. And then a point that you've made quite substantially, she said, okay, it's true, the digital world's amazing, you can do all these fantastic things, but you can't eat information technology, you can't wear it, you can't live in it, so all that's going to change as well. Energy, buildings, clothes printed out by 3D printers, food from vertical agriculture, these are all going to become information technologies. And subject to the very profound deflation rate of information technology. And maybe everyone wonders why there's an inflation when there's all these inflationary pressures. It's because information technology is deflationary.
Yeah.
I can get the same computation, communication, genetic sequencing I could a year ago today for half the price. And that is going to pervade these products that we have not associated with digital technology, like food, energy, buildings, clothes.
I was advising and counseling a bunch of entrepreneurs who are just finishing college and in grad school. They're trying to figure out what to go do next and where should you go start a company. And I was making the point to them, and I'm wondering on your feedback here, that this notion that we're about to have 4 billion new consumers, 4.2 billion new consumers coming online in the next decade. And these 4.2 billion people around the world are coming on at 100 megabit, gigabit connection speeds, but they're going to want everything we want, but they're not going to go to a bank branch, they're not going to go to an insurance broker, they're not going to go to a doctor, they're not going to go to a school. So it's like, can you build products and services that are completely dematerialized for those 4 billion people?
Yeah, well, I mean, you've talked about this a lot, and this is affecting every industry. So it's not like you have to work in a traditionally high-tech industry to take advantage of these digital revolutions or engage in disruptive change. It's affecting everything. All these traditional industries are becoming information technologies.
Yeah.
And it's going to be worldwide. I mean, it already is. 4 billion people's half the planet as it is.
Pretty good.
That can't continue to grow exponentially. So biology is pretty slow. But, I mean, we're already far more powerful just because our tools are so powerful, and that's going to continue to accelerate.
Let me ask you a provocative question. One of the things, we have a lot of I use the moniker dangerous ideas here. And I'm genuinely curious about this because we haven't had this conversation about how these exponential technologies are going to impact the nation state. Because you've said this eloquently, and I said it and agree, we've got this continuous exponential growth that's almost unstoppable. But we have these factors in society like government. People like waking up in the morning and realizing the world hasn't changed from the night before. We don't like change inherently as humans. But religious institutions and government institutions try and stabilize things. So is the nation state, that as we know it today, going to be around 20, 30, 40 years from now? What are your thoughts there?
Well, mechanical typewriters are still around.
Yeah.
Horses and buggies are still around.
Just not very used.
Right. So these institutions stick around, but they change their role in our lives. They already have. The nation state is not as profound as it was. Religion used to
dominate,
direct every aspect of your life, minute to minute, It's still important in some ways, but it's much less important, much less pervasive, plays a much smaller role in most people's lives than it did. And the same is true for governments. And we are fantastically interconnected already. There's some issue with the pension funds in Spain, and the economies all over the world feel it, but also react to it and absorb it. Nation states are not islands anymore. They used to be that way much more so. So we're already much more of a global community. The generation growing up today really feel like world citizens much more than ever before, because they're talking to people all over the world, and it's not a novelty. I mean, they've grown up that way. So that, we watch news on CNN and so on, and it focuses on certain issues, and yes, they're important, but the kind of disruptive change that both of us talk about is what is really important. If you watch the news, you get the idea that the world's going to hell, it's getting worse, none of which is true. There's these profound trends where things are getting better. There was a poll taken of 24,000 people in 26 countries where they asked, is poverty worldwide getting better or worse? And 90% said incorrectly it's getting worse. Only 1% identified correctly that it's fallen by 50% or more. And that's true in many different areas. Everything is getting better. Health, education, democratization.
I just got this text that here it is. It says here, famine deaths are down per 100,000 in 1970s. 529 deaths from famine. Today it's 3 per 100,000.
So there's statistics like this in every area.
Yeah.
And people are really unaware of it. I mean, their algorithm for determining is the world getting better or worse is how often do they hear about bad news. Yeah. And there's a fascination with bad news. There's actually an evolutionary reason that we pay attention to bad news. When you're walking through the jungle, it was a good idea to pay attention to the bad news, like a little rustling in the leaves that might be a predator. The fact that your crops were 1% better than last year, you didn't really have to pay attention to that. So our ability to be aware of the bad news, some tragedy halfway around the world, is getting exponentially better. It's actually a good thing, but it leads to a misperception.
Yeah. I mean, I think about this a lot. In fact, in the Abundance Digital community and within SU, the 5 principles that I bring forward all the time is, number 1, helping everybody have an abundance mindset, right? Because as an entrepreneur, if you think everything is getting worse, you're never going to invest in the future. You're going to make incorrect investments in the future. And the challenge for most people, I mean, you and I are lucky. I live at X Prize and at SU. You're here at Google, and there's a everything is possible abundance mindset that people have here. And did you have that growing up? Did you have that as an entrepreneur? When did you get that? Because I think that's a really critical part of being a successful entrepreneur, having that mindset of abundance.
I think I did get that from my family. They were profoundly optimistic and felt that any problem can be overcome. My grandfather was particularly proud of having escaped with his whole family intact from Hitler, and that was a pretty big challenge. And that continued, that all these different problems could be solved. And I began being an entrepreneur pretty early. I mean, I got involved with my own computer projects as a teenager. Became the software engineer for Head Start at 14 and started a business at 18, which was successful.
Not too shabby, pal.
My point is that yes, I had an optimistic and entrepreneurial attitude, and it did come from my family. My great-grandmother, as I've mentioned before, started a school in 1868. That was an enterprise, and it was socially disruptive. It was the first school to provide a higher education for girls, went from K to 14th grade, and it was very controversial. Like, what is the point of educating girls to that degree? And it really revolutionized women's education. So disruption and value of education and knowledge and optimism about the future really came from my family.
Yeah, I found that when I wrote my last book, Bold, when I had interviewed Jeff Bezos and Larry Page and Elon and Richard Branson, one of the attributes they all shared, and I found it with almost all great world-changing entrepreneurs, is a sense of optimism and abundance. And I think that's partly why, I think to be a great entrepreneur, you need to have that positive mindset and not let the crisis news network get you down. Another thing I think that's important, I'm curious if it impacted your life, I know it was mine, is having a community around you that is supportive in helping you. Because if you're an entrepreneur someplace and you have a crazy idea, and I remind people the day before something is really a breakthrough, it's a crazy idea. If you have people shooting you down and telling you that's terrible, it's really hard to break out. And so I know I had a very supportive, when I was at MIT and within my own organizations, I had this very dreamy, anything is possible community supporting me that allowed me to dream bigger. Did you have that?
Well, I agree that's important, and I've gained that over time. I started a little bit earlier than you did, and there wasn't much of an entrepreneurial community. When I started my first major business, which developed the reading machine and flatbed scanner and speech synthesis and so on, 1974, the total amount of high-tech venture capital in the United States was $10 million.
Mostly in Boston, right? I mean, it was early on.
But 10 million, I mean, that's
nothing.
That's a small deal today.
Yeah, that's not even, it's a seed round.
So, in fact, I raised seed capital, so I had some support. That phrase did not exist, but, basically friends and family. So that's part of being an entrepreneur, is going out on a limb and risking not only your own well-being, but the resources of your loved ones. There wasn't much of an entrepreneurial community. Venture capital really didn't exist, and these terms didn't exist, and there was no entrepreneurial community, and the whole idea of the spirit of entrepreneurship barely existed. I remember 1968, MIT started a program called USP, Undergraduate Special Program. It was the first program at MIT to support entrepreneurship, and I was one of the flagship members of that. You basically, your entire educational program then was starting a business. So I started a business matching up high school students to colleges. But that was the beginning of entrepreneurship, and it was a radically new concept. So I'd say by the 1980s, it became a kind of established thing, but it was not a concept that anybody recognized in the 60s.
I'm curious about another, one of the things that we talk about at Singularity University a lot for the graduate studies, the Global Solutions Program, and that I speak a lot about in Abundance Digital, is having a massively transformative purpose. Something that drives you. I'm just curious, you've had a number of them, and you can have more than one as a person, but how would you describe your MTP, Ray, and when did that originate for you?
Well, my father had a major heart attack when I was 15. He then died when I was 22. So I began to be interested in health. I was concerned about him, and then I was responding to his loss. But I also then recognized I probably inherited his disposition to heart disease, and as it turned out, type 2 diabetes. So at that point, I put it on my long-term to-do list to overcome heart disease and death, and really had that idea.
You slipped in there, and death.
Yeah.
Which I share with Ray.
Well, I mean, death and the fear of death and how to deal with this profoundly antagonizing concept to everything we believe in has animated human history.
Yeah.
We've come up with theories and ideas about it, rationalize, that tragic thing, that's actually a liberation. It's a good thing. The purpose of life is to embrace death, which is a rationalization, because our first reaction to hearing someone died is that, we don't rejoice. depending on maybe who it is, but
let's not go there.
but we've rationalized that tragedy. So in fact, I had that idea really earlier, like at 10.
So that drove.
I had articulated, we don't really have to die, and we should extend human life dramatically. It was kind of a vague idea at 10. It became more formal when I realized that I had, a genetic disposition to deal with. It was on my long-term to-do list.
Yeah.
About a decade later, mid-30s, I was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, and I said, okay, I need to bump up the priority of this. And then I really delved into it. I wrote my first health book, and I'd say in the...
This is the 10% diet?
Yeah.
So, which is a great book, by the way.
In the 80s, and it really became a major theme, overcoming death, and it's closely related to artificial intelligence in terms of enhancing who we are, physically, biologically, and mentally, intellectually, creatively. It's all kind of part of the same cloth.
So if I may, again, what the themes for me that drive a great entrepreneur is, an abundance mindset, having a great community, having an MTP that emotionally drives you, and obviously the connection to your dad's early passing and the what that brings up in you drove that emotion, and then having that drive a moonshot, right? And you've been involved in a number of moonshots. You and I share a moonshot. My earliest MTP was space, that drove a lot of the space stuff I'm doing, but then lately I've caught up with you in the last decade with a focus on an MTP of extending the healthy human lifespan. And a few moonshots there. Let's talk about sort of the moonshots in extending the lifespan. I'm assuming that you guys are all interested in adding 30 to 40 healthy years, but what do you think is possible in terms of extension?
Well, at least our viewers who still have a version 1.0 biological body.
Yeah. Well, actually, we can't actually know that for a fact.
Yeah, well, version 2 is still in, not beta yet, but we're close.
Especially here at the hallowed halls of Google. I love the Time magazine, Google cheats death. And at the same time that I was starting Human Longevity with Craig Venter, of which you're an advisor, you and Bill Maris and others were advising Larry and Sergey and the team here on creating Calico, which is an Alphabet company.
Yeah. I mean, Calico's been pretty quiet. What little I know about it, I really can't share, but...
oh, come on, no one's listening.
But it is one of many examples of the increasing interest in Bridge 2, which is reprogramming the outdated software of life. It's not a metaphor to say that biology is software. Our genes are strings of data. But it evolved when conditions were very different. And it was not in the interest of humans to live more than in their 20s.
Yeah.
At that point, evolution was not on your side, because you're using up the food and resources of the tribe, and it's better that you not live. There's a small exception to that called the grandma hypothesis, that it was beneficial to human development that there be some grandparents who could then share their wisdom and help the evolution of technology and culture. But a few grandmas would do.
If I could expand on this, just I've always wondered, and if you do the math, hundreds of thousands of years ago, when you went into puberty, age 13, you'd have a baby. I mean, literally at that point. Then by the time you were 26, your baby's having a baby, you're a grandparent.
By the time you're 26, you're probably dead. I mean, life expectancy was 19 1,000 years ago.
All right. Well, the fact is, the older you got, before there was McDonald's and Whole Foods, if you were taking food out of the mouths of your children or their grandchildren, you never passed the genes along. So the best thing you could do is give your bits back to the environment.
Yeah, and evolution did not favor long life. And so, for example, our immune system, which is great, you wouldn't last long without it, does not recognize cancers and thinks, oh, that's me, because that's something that happens later on in life. So biotechnology is to reprogram biology, the
How
software
long-
of life. I mean, that's what HLI is trying to do.
Yeah.
But it's a major movement. It's the cutting edge of medicine. It was enabled by Craig Venter's little project that sequenced the genome. These technologies have been doubling in power every year. They're now 10,000 times more powerful than when the genome was sequenced in 2003. And we're beginning now to get clinical impact. We can now fix a broken heart from a heart attack. We can grow organs.
We can edit a genome and fix a genetic disease.
I mean, at United Therapeutics, we're growing organs, ultimately with the patient's own DNA, installing them successfully in pigs, which are actually pretty close to humans,
Yeah.
coming to a human near you soon. But we're going to basically completely redefine health and medicine. Health and medicine has not been an information technology up until just recently. I mean, yes, we use computers to keep patient records. Actually, we don't even do that very well, but and to organize the information. But fundamentally, it's been hit or miss. We just kind of find certain chemicals that have a beneficial impact. We're now actually reprogramming biology, understanding, designing interventions based on the reverse engineering of human biology. And that's an exponential process, and that is now entering clinical impacts right at the cutting edge, like the ability to reprogram adult stem cells and rejuvenate a damaged heart, which half of all heart attack survivors have. If you're an American, you've got to go be a medical tourist. It'll be approved soon.
And of course, Singularity, which is my latest company, which United Therapeutics, which you're on the board of, is a large investor in. There is a whole movement towards, making aging a disease and not an inevitability.
So, I mean, but that is the cutting edge of all of medicine. Yeah. It's a trickle today of actual clinical applications. It's going to be a flood over the next decade. All the statistics on life insurance and health insurance and figuring out whether Social Security will be solvent in 20 years are based on models of the continued linear progress of health and medicine. And I've talked to people who are involved in setting, for example, in life insurance rates, and say, oh, well, we take into consideration medical progress using a model that's come from the linear progression of health and medicine, as if completely ignoring this transformation.
If you're looking for an industry to disrupt, insurance is going to be disrupted so many ways to Friday, it's not funny, between blockchain, autonomous cars, extending human lifespan.
And getting accurate models of health and medicine.
Yeah, I mean, all of this stuff. How old are you targeting to live, Ray? Do you have a target number?
Yes, I would like. Well, first of all,
I'll tell you mine if you tell me yours.
I'd like to live to tomorrow.
Yes, we can help that.
So that's a start. I feel that I will always feel that way. So I talk to people that say, oh, I don't want to live past 90 or 95. Then I talk to 95-year-olds, and they, in fact, want to live to tomorrow and next year. And my other goal then is to live past longevity escape velocity.
What does that mean?
So that means that we're adding more time than is going by, not just to infant life expectancy, but to your remaining life expectancy. Now, life expectancy is at any point in time is a statistical phenomena. You could have a computed life expectancy based on today's technology of whatever, 50 years, still be hit by the proverbial bus tomorrow. We're working on that too, particularly here with self-driving cars. Yes. But, and I talk about actually four bridges to radical life extension, each of which attacks the phenomena that cut our lives short. In my view, it's not death that gives life meaning, although I've had this debate with people. It's what you can do with life. Be creative, have relationships, love people, be funny, create music, and that's going to be enhanced. So when we talk about living hundreds of years, people envision being a quintessential 95-year-old living hundreds of years, and that's not what we're talking about. We're not even talking about being a 25-year-old and living hundreds of years, but profoundly enhancing who we are. I think it would be profoundly actually disturbing and we'd suffer from a deep ennui, that's a cool French word, if we had radical life extension without radical life expansion.
Yeah.
But we're going to merge with AI. We can talk about that. We're going to become smarter. We're going to add to the hierarchy of the neocortex, so we're going to create things that we can't even envision now, the way we did the last time we got more neocortex, when we became humanoids and we invented language and music and humor.
2 million years ago.
Tried explaining music to a primate.
Let me expand on what Ray just said here on this idea of longevity escape velocity. So science is continually extending the human lifespan, helping us cure heart disease, cancer, eventually neurodegenerative disease. And so there's a point at which for every year that you're alive, science is extending your life for more than a year. And it's a mechanism of living long enough to live forever, to coin your phrase. What's your prediction of when we're going to hit longevity escape velocity?
So I think we'll actually hit it before we can prove that we've hit it.
Okay.
I think I've hit it myself. I think my life expectancy is not getting shorter. It's actually getting longer. For one reason for that is that I'm very aggressive in adopting sort of cutting edge ideas and keeping track of my own situation and being proactive.
But for the general public, what do you think? What's the number of? I've heard you quote a number. I just want to.
I think it's only 10, 12 years away.
So let me just translate that, right?
Because that at that point, biotechnology is going to have taken over medicine. It's just the next decade is going to be a profound revolution.
It's bio and AI together.
And that's, well, I mean, AI helps biotechnology, but it's fundamentally biotechnology. And that's just bridge 2.
Yep.
That'll bring us to bridge 3, which is nano robots that can basically finish the job of the immune system.
So, your job here is don't do something stupid over the next 15 years.
Yeah, wear your seatbelt till we get the self-driving cars going.
And then the other question is, if you're an entrepreneur, and I think about this a lot, right? If all of a sudden people are beginning to live longer and longer and longer, which they will, and we have this age wave right now, but what are the business opportunities as life begins to extend? I think about that as I'm looking at businesses.
That doesn't necessarily mean providing products for what we now think of as elderly people, because we're going to become less elderly in terms of the stereotypical view of what that means.
Yeah, it's healthy aging. Yeah. So I've got
aging. I think aging will just mean getting wiser because we'll have more experience.
By the way, it's going to be a huge economic boom to countries, because imagine instead of retiring at age 65, you stay in the workforce and continue to generate revenue at the top of your game, right? So if you're at retirement age, consider not retiring. I think one of the most amazing correlations is when you retire, your death rate for retirees is super high.
Well, people actually do get sick very often when they retire because they kind of lost their purpose. The whole idea of retirement implies that you don't like what you're doing and you're very eager to do something else, that maybe something you have a passion for, that you've always wanted to do. Why not do that in the first place? And I think the kind of economic situation we're entering that's actually the best economic strategy is to do something you have a passion for in the first place.
Which goes back to your MTP, right? What's your massively transformative purpose? What's driven you as a child? What's excited you? And then how do you take on a moonshot that is hard, that you can work on over a decade, right? I mean, my moonshots in space and longevity and abundance are decadal, and yours are.
There can be many ways of doing that.
Yeah.
My father had a talent for music. He was a genius at that and knew that when he was 5. And so his musical creations was his transformative purpose.
Sure.
Some people are good at understanding the psychology of other people and creating organizations or helping people with their relationships, being a counselor or a therapist. I mean, there's many different ways that you can contribute. Some people discover their passion young as a child. Some people takes longer. I think that's the purpose of education now, is really to help people discover what they have a passion for, which means experiencing the world and the different kinds of purposes you can have.
We have a ton of questions from this amazing community. Thank you guys for the questions you sent in advance and the questions that you're working with AJ, who's sitting right next to us, gathering. First question I have here from Steve is, when do you think we're going to see an AI like Jarvis? In Iron Man, Jarvis is sort of a personal AI that helps you interpret information, interface with the world. Where are we now, and how fast will we get to something Jarvis-like?
Well, another example of Jarvis was Samantha and Her.
Yeah, which was a great movie, a non-dystopian movie for the first time. Thank you, Hollywood.
Well, I mean, it was a futuristic movie that I thought was somewhat consistent with my ideas, because not only was it not dystopian, but it wasn't this one AI versus a brave band of humans for control of the world. It wasn't one AI. Everybody had their OS, and it was smart enough for you to fall in love with and have a relationship with. So, I mean, that's an articulation of human-level AI, which I've been very consistent at putting at 2029. So actually, in a book I wrote in 1989, Age of Intelligent Machines...
2029 is 11 years from now.
No, it's 12.
Well, we're about at 2018, so... If it's going to be available in 2029, it'll be in beta in 2028.
Well, things are going to be moving quickly, so it's December 2029. But so I bounded it, I said, from early 2000s to late 2030s in the age of intelligent machines, which I wrote in the 80s. Actually, it took longer to write a book in those days. My most important information technology was a roll of quarters that I could use to feed the copier in the library. Really, because, I mean, that's how you did
your research, huh?
You went to a library and you'd find some pages and you had to copy them.
If you were lucky enough to find the pages.
Right. I mean, that was a skill. So 1999, I said 2029, Age of Spiritual Machines.
That's amazing.
So that was very controversial. Stanford held a conference on my prediction, and they took a poll. There are no instant polling devices, so it was by hand. But the consensus of AI experts was hundreds of years, if ever. I'd say 25% said it would never happen. 2006, there was a conference, AI 50, at Dartmouth to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the 1956 Dartmouth conference that gave AI its name, by my mentor Marvin Minsky and John McCarthy. And the consensus, then we had instant polling devices, and consensus was 50 years. Polls now the median is 20 to 30 years. There's a growing group of people who think I'm too conservative. But that's looking quite sound to me. I mean, it's looking more and more comfortable. Like, I see what we can do already. We have computers that do a pretty good job of understanding the meaning of natural language. And
a friend of mine's company called Viv was just acquired by Samsung. They've done, these are from the founders of Siri, they've done an amazing job, and it's the age of the personal assistant, they call it. So 2029 for Jarvis-like interface.
I mean, they're getting better at a fantastic pace. Yeah. I mean, in a matter of months, the systems that I see and experience and work with are getting rapidly better. So 2029 is going to be about right.
And you're inside the rabbit hole here at Google. So my question to you guys is what does that make you think about, right? I mean, if you've got Jarvis level, to put a mental mindset in place of that can answer questions, help gather data for you, project the data for you, help you analyze the data. I mean, it becomes pretty incredible what the average person can start to think about and do.
I mean, my view, there's a lot of discussion about AI versus the humans, and there's a long history of dystopian futurist movies along those lines. But in my view, it's part of who we are. I mean, we are the technology creating species, and we've always done that to extend our reach.
Yeah.
So we created a tool that allowed us to reach fruit at that higher branch. We created tools that allowed us to build structures that we couldn't build with our bare hands. I mean, who here could build a skyscraper, but we leverage our muscles. And now we've leveraged our minds so we can access all of human knowledge and not just access the knowledge, but we have all these AI assistants that help us find the knowledge.
And it's democratized and leveled the playing field where I like to say access to Google for the poorest child in Africa and access to Google for Larry Page is the same.
Right,
it's amazing.
Exactly.
I'm just having him confirm for me that Larry Page and that kid in Africa have the same access to Google.
They do, and the bandwidth is getting pretty comparable.
Who's going to lose when that happens?
So it is democratized, and we completely ignore that in our economic statistics. That's another whole issue. But these are brain extenders today. We're going to literally put them inside our bodies and brains. I think that's somewhat of an arbitrary distinction. So even if it's on my belt or in my pocket, it is a brain extender.
Yeah.
It really feels that way. I mean, and people really think of it that way. They can't leave their smartphone at home because it is part of their mind.
Yeah. I do a poll when I go out and speak, and right now probably have done this to 20,000 people and asked, does anybody in the room not have their cell phone with them? I've had one hand go up, one hand, and it's extraordinary because you move more than a meter from this thing, and you get nervous. There's a connection. So let's talk about the next step, which is connecting the neocortex with the cloud. We've talked about this a lot. You and I have a mutual friend, Brian Johnson, who's the CEO of Kernel. Brian's going to be on stage with you at Abundance 360, going deep into brain-computer interface. Elon's working on it with Neural Lace, Advanced Micro Devices. Facebook's working on it. I'm sure someplace within the kilometer here it's going on. Talk about BCI here. You made a concrete prediction of when we're going to have it, but what does that mean?
Right, well the projects you mentioned now I think will be usable for specific overcoming profound deficits, cognitive deficits, paralysis, enabling people to communicate who are profoundly disabled. What I'm talking about, and these are precursor technologies to what I'm talking about.
These are the transistors.
But the neocortex, well, to back up, the world is hierarchical. Trees have trunks, which have branches, which have more branches, which have leaves. It's a hierarchical structure of the world. So evolution said, gee, it'd be useful to have a brain structure that could understand hierarchies. And invented the neocortex 200 million years ago.
You write about this in How to Create a Mind.
Yeah. And so it enabled these early mammals to actually invent new behaviors. Non-mammalian animals without a neocortex have fixed behaviors. They could evolve a new fixed behavior over 10,000 generations. And that was good enough actually 200 million years ago because the environment changed very slowly. But then there was a sudden change 65 million years ago. If you look at the rock structures representing 65 million years ago, the geologists will explain that shows a catastrophic change to the environment.
An increased layer of iridium that shows us a metallic chondrite hit the Earth.
That's the leading hypothesis. The volcanic
supervolcanoes
action crowd has not completely given in yet. But anyway, something happened, and that's when mammals overtook their ecological niche. And now they got bigger, their brains got bigger even faster, and the neocortex got bigger even faster, and that developed these curvatures and ridges that are distinctive of a primate brain. And then 2 million years ago, if you remember,
it's been a while, but I remember, yeah.
we were walking around, and we didn't have these big foreheads. And so evolution said, neocortex is pretty good stuff. Let's have even more, and developed a larger enclosure, all of which provided for more neocortex.
By the way, limited by the pelvis as a constraint for the size of the brain.
Right. Well, the brain couldn't get any bigger because birth would have been impossible.
Yeah.
So there probably were some really smart humanoids then, but they couldn't pass on their genes. And the fact that this was additional neocortex has been controversial. I wrote about that actually 50 years ago, but and there was one neuroscientist that confirmed that through autopsies. But at any rate, it is additional neocortex. So what did we do with it? We put it at the top of the hierarchy. The neocortex is organized in a hierarchy. It's not one big neural net. So this is where my thesis on how the brain works differs from just the normal sort of big neural net in the connectionist field. It's lots of different modules, each of which is a small neural net, can learn a pattern, remember it, recognize it, but they're organized in a hierarchy. And recently, the European Brain Reverse Engineering Project has confirmed that there is this repeating module of about 100 neurons, repeated 300 million times. These are the modules in the neocortex. There's no plasticity within your lifetime. It doesn't change within the module, but the connections between the modules are changing. And we can see in a module axons coming in from other modules, showing a hierarchy. And the hierarchy is created by our own thinking. And as you go up the hierarchy, things get more interesting and more intelligent. The very bottom of the hierarchy, I can tell that that's a curved line. I can tell that that's a straight line. At the top of the hierarchy, I can tell that that's funny, that's ironic, she's pretty. So what we did with it, since we were already doing a great job of being primates, we put it at the top of the neocortical hierarchy. And that was the enabling factor for us to invent language and music. No other primate has music. Every human culture we've ever discovered has music, humor, technology. That also needed this opposable appendage, but in terms of brain activity, that was the enabling factor. It was a one-shot deal, because as we just said, the brain could not continue to grow in size, but it was enough to just put us over that threshold where we could then create technology that would enhance us further. So we're going to do it again. We're going to, I mean, what I'm doing here and what I've actually been doing for quite a while is creating...
Here at Google, in other words, what Larry brought you in for.
Is to create AI based on my model of the neocortex. And I'm not saying we have perfect knowledge of the neocortex yet. We're getting better and better models as we get more information from the Brain Reverse Engineering Project. By the 2030s, we'll have really neocortex that's as good or better than our current neocortex, but it'll be bigger, and we'll be able to connect our neocortex wirelessly to the cloud, just the way your smartphone. That smartphone is billions of times more powerful per dollar than the computer I used at MIT, but that's not the most interesting thing. It makes itself thousands, millions of times more powerful yet by connecting to millions of computers in the cloud. We can't yet do that with our brains. We do actually expand our brains indirectly through these devices, but we'll do it directly from our neocortex, and not just to do the things we do with our smartphones, like search and translation directly from our brains, although that'll be feasible and useful, but to actually connect to more neocortex. So just like we did 2 million years ago, we're going to expand our neocortex. And just like we did 2 million years ago, we'll put it at the top of the neocortical hierarchy. And just as we did then, we'll create whole new concepts and ways of communicating that we can't even understand without that additional neocortex. So, I mean, primates who don't have that additional neocortex can't understand music or language or humor. So we'll create things of that profound nature. So we'll become smarter, we'll become funnier, The only difference is that unlike 2 million years ago, it won't be a one-shot deal because the cloud is doubling in power as we speak and will continue to grow exponentially.
So, I mean, the question, I think about this a lot, right? Because we can't know what this will enable. I mean, if you're connecting your neocortex to the cloud, you ask a question, you think, and you know the answer instantly, and you can increase your conceptual intelligence, where I can start thinking about, quantum physics, which, 1805, it was 805 and 807 really were challenging for me at MIT. I was going the molecular biology route, but I wanted so much to become a physicist.
Well, Feynman said, if you think you understand quantum mechanics, you don't understand.
Yeah.
So, but it won't, as you're saying, it won't just be a matter of answering questions we can't answer today, but coming up with questions we couldn't even contemplate.
And so when people talk about the future of jobs, 2035, the mid-2030s, 18 years from now, I mean, the concept of what we're going to be even doing is unfathomable. We cannot understand that.
I mean, what we are doing now is unfathomable to people in 1950, let alone 1900.
Yeah.
We've eliminated all the jobs from 1900, essentially, and yet we have a larger fraction of the population growing, working, making an order of magnitude more money per hour in constant dollars, and doing much more interesting work. We're moving up Maslow's hierarchy.
Paolo, I have a bunch of questions I want to ask rapid fire here. So Brianna is asking, and I've got a bunch that AJ is bringing from the community here. Who's going to win the battle on AI prowess? Amazon, Google, Facebook, Tesla? It seems like Amazon is way out ahead of Google recently.
I mean, it is a community project.
Yeah. There is a lot of collaboration still.
There's lots of collaboration. There's lots of academic research that's exciting that is incorporated in all these systems. They're all somewhat close. I mean, I don't want to sit here and tout.
All right, that's fair enough, because I agree with you. Everybody's collaborating and working together.
Right. We're all benefiting from each other's work. It's all pretty close. There are small differences that make a difference in the marketplace. Google's not doing too badly, I think.
I think Google's is dominant. But Jeff, I've known Jeff for 35 years. He is an incredible, driven person. He's got amazing MTP. Eric asks, where on the Gartner hype cycle do you think AI is today? In particular with autonomous vehicles. So I teach about the AI, about the Gartner hype cycle. We talk about how to read an exponential curve in the Abundance digital community.
Right. I mean, I've written about the life cycle of technologies. So very often this hype is accurate but mistimed. So, if in the 1990s you had the URL dog.com, you were a billionaire. Then around the year 2000, the financial community said, no, wait a second, you can't make money on these internet companies. And the internet crash almost took down the world economy. The internet was revolutionary. We have little internet companies now, you've mentioned a few of them, that are worth trillions of dollars together. So a lot of these technologies, I think, are in the hype phase. These phases are shorter than they used to be because of the acceleration. So like virtual reality, 3D printing, they've got some interesting niche applications, but they're not ready for prime time yet. They're only a few years off. I think 3D printing is going to revolutionize manufacturing starting around 2020. Then we'll be able to print out clothing.
Which is a $10 trillion industry, by the way, global manufacturing.
But I don't really view that have that perspective with regard to AI. The hype is justified, or the excitement. It is profoundly revolutionizing every industry. And every industry is going to become an AI industry very soon. And we've just begun to scratch the surface.
Well, here's a fun...
It's proceeding very quickly. So it's not hype. It's justified excitement.
Here's a fun one from Joanna on a specific AI-enabled industry. She asks, what is the future of gender when female robots are already being used for sex and the AI industry is primarily run by men? Will there be equality in the singularity, or will it make inequality even more prevalent?
I mean, I think we're going to, particularly when virtual and augmented reality get going, we can expand our concepts of sexuality and beauty. We're doing that already with the prevalence of communication technologies, and we're discovering that the actual reality of human sexuality is more complicated than just this duality of male and female. Martine Rothblatt, whom we both know and work with, has written The Apartheid of Gender, that sexuality and gender is much more complex a phenomenon. It's not only a continuum, but it's a continuum in multiple dimensions. And part of the human freedom movement is to actually recognize these differences, which very often people had to repress. So we find people are very different regarding their gender identification, their interests in sexuality. And so I think we'll be able to celebrate that more. In 2001, I did a TED presentation where I turned myself into a young female rock singer using virtual reality technology. I had magnetic sensors picked up my movement, and it created in real time an animation of a young woman. And then a band came on stage, and I sang a song, and my voice was turned into a woman's voice, and it drove her lips. And my 13-year-old daughter came on stage, and she was turned into Richard Saul Wurman, the TED impresario. Her avatar looked very realistic, and people had not seen Richard Saul Wurman do hip-hop kicks before. The purpose of it was to show that in virtual reality, you can be someone else.
Yes.
So right now, actually changing your gender in real reality is a pretty significant, profound process, but you could do it in virtual reality much more easily, and you can be someone else. A couple could become each other and discover the relationship from the other's perspective. And so it'll be, I think, liberating in terms of we don't have to just have the same boring body. No offense to the audience, speaking for myself, all the time. So I think virtual or augmented reality, as it becomes very realistic, incorporates all the senses, particularly in the 2030s when it goes inside the nervous system with these nanorobots, will enable us to be someone else and have other kinds of experiences.
AJ asks a question from the community here to both of us, which is, if you were 30 today, what would you be spending your days on? And I'll extrapolate, what kind of companies would you consider as an entrepreneur building?
I still feel 18, actually.
Yeah. I sort of locked in for myself at 27. So.
Okay. And in fact, I asked my grandfather when he was 82 and I was 22, gee, what's it like being 82? And he said, well, I haven't noticed any difference, he said. Yes, there's been some subtle differences in my body, and but you kind of get used to those. And he said the only thing he really has noticed is that the frequency with which your loved ones pass from the scene gets greater and greater as you get older. We hope to actually change that phenomena. But I assume that was asked by a young person, because I think as you get older, your identity doesn't change. I'm not doing anything differently than I was. I'm still involved with projects.
Let's change it. What advice would you give to a 30-year-old today in terms of what they should be focusing on, or what, if they were an entrepreneur looking to start companies, where would they find the most excitement, fun, opportunity?
Well, it's kind of a old piece of advice, which is to find your passion.
Find your MTP first.
And some people really have an innate passion for music or art or writing or science, and that becomes apparent. Generally, if you have that, that'll be apparent when you're a child. other people need to experience things in life and find what they have a passion for, because it may be more complex, a combination of their skills communicating with other people and or having relationships, but find something where you have a passion. And it's not, I mean, technology is changing the world, but that doesn't mean you have to be a software engineer. I mean, that's a great thing to be, but all these different fields are being transformed. Being a musician, I mean, my father couldn't even hear his compositions, except occasionally up late at night arguing with funders to hire an orchestra so he actually could hear his composition. So today, you know, kids in their dorm room with their iPads and MIDI keyboards can create a whole orchestra and create fantastic ensembles that were impossible before, and so on. So your ability to be creative in every field is being transformed. And as you've pointed out, every field is being changed. I mean, what's your view of this?
I mean, if I were 30 and I feel 30, and I think I'm probably in creating companies and doing more at a much higher frequency than I was at 30, so I'm looking at those things. I agree. First, find out if you're not doing something that's within your emotional MTP. If you're doing something just for money or something like that, that's a waste. There's so much opportunity all over the place. I think about the following, right? There are opportunities for entrepreneurs. So I work with a lot of the Fortune 500 companies through Innovation Partnership Program and through all the stuff we do at SU, and they're all starving for new thinking. They're all so locked in. So can you know, if you were in the data space, collecting large sets of data and being able to do some machine learning on that data to create algorithms, there's opportunities there. Helping and running, creating a culture of experimentation. A lot of these large companies, they have assets, they have brand, they have cash, they have customers, they have data, but they don't have that, you know, sort of opportunity for real innovative creation.
I mean, it really is true that the pace of change is getting faster and faster. We started KurzweilAI.net in 2001, actually at its TED, announced it at TED. Yeah. And maybe every couple of weeks there'd be some really interesting breakthrough. There's now several a day. Yeah. And you talk to entrepreneurs and there's like new exciting perspectives and ideas every few weeks. The pace, so if you don't discover it this week, you can discover it next week. Talk to lots of people and you'll find other people with ideas that seem revolutionary. And if one really seems exciting to you and something that you think you can contribute to, you can you know, join that team.
I mean, that's what we're trying to curate within the Abundance Digital community is create a community of people who've got MTPs, have moonshots, have access to these technologies, and can team up and start companies together, or at least support each other's ideas, right? By the way, one thing I think it's really important, I can't stress this enough, there's a mindset out there that if you have an idea, you need to keep it very close to yourself. Because someone might steal it from you. And I think I learned early on that the idea is the easy part, and it's execution which is the hard part. Can you comment on that?
This discussion comes up a lot. I'm in fact involved with a couple of stealth companies that really think it's important to keep their projects quiet. My orientation has always been to actually talk about your project so you can get excitement, get publicity, that'll attract resources like other people to work on it, and not to mention investors. Yeah. Typically, it's your own execution, not competition, that determines your success. My aunt actually, who's now in her 90s, was head of a major advertising agency, always said, if someone's not copying your idea, you've got the wrong idea. And Google wasn't the only search engine, it just did a good job, and it's true of all of these companies that have succeeded. And to do a good job, you have to attract other people to work on it, and that's very hard to do if you're keeping it secret.
Just, as a piece of advice for entrepreneurs, if you've got an idea, share it, because you're going to get a lot more benefit from sharing the idea and getting feedback Joanna tried that idea, or Bob tried that idea, and this is why it failed.
Well,
So don't go down those paths again.
Yeah, even large companies do that. I mean, Google took its machine learning software platform and made it open source, TensorFlow.
Yeah.
And there was discussion internally, does that make sense to basically give our crown jewels to everyone? The argument for it, which has proven to be correct, is okay, everyone's going to use it and improve it, and we'll benefit from that. It'll help the world, but ultimately we're better off. And also creating some goodwill so we can attract talent in the future.
Yeah. So one of the upvoted questions, not a hard one to guess here, but is, Ray, what's your craziest prediction for the end of this next century or beyond? And I have a guess.
This century, as
well,
opposed to next century.
I guess the question is, some 80 years from now, what's your craziest prediction at the end of your predictions here?
Well, I mean, I'm saying that we're going to begin to extend our thinking in the cloud by having these medical nanorobots go in our brain and connect the top layer of our neocortex to new layers of the neocortex in the cloud. So our thinking in the 2030s will be a hybrid of our biological thinking and non-biological thinking. The non-biological part of our thinking is subject to the law of accelerating returns. It's going to grow exponentially. It actually won't take that long for it to predominate. So that's the idea behind the singularity, that by 2045 we've expanded our intelligence a billion-fold, almost all of which then is non-biological. And this also affects our physical bodies. There's many scenarios where we can actually create literally a physical body with self-organizing nanotechnology, not to mention all the interesting things we can do in virtual reality, which will be virtually indistinguishable from real reality. So that's the 2040s. We call that the singularity. The metaphor there, which we borrowed from physics, is to the event horizon. There's an event horizon around a physics singularity, such that gravity is so strong within that event horizon that information can't easily get out. There's been some interesting discussions that that's a classical viewpoint, and that in terms of quantum events, there are particle pairs created at that event horizon.
Evaporating black holes.
And that information does leak out that way. And Hawking was against that, but he acknowledged that that is in fact the case. But that's actually a good metaphor still, because it's hard to see beyond the event horizon, but not impossible.
The translation is you can't predict what's going to happen in 80 years. You can barely predict what's going to happen in 30.
Well, we can make certain predictions about the basic capacity of information technology, what it's going to enable us to do. Exactly how we'll use that is hard to see. So that's the metaphor, the event horizon around a black hole, which is a physics singularity. And that's in the 2040s. So it's really hard to contemplate beyond that. I think space then becomes very interesting. We can explore space. I think largely we're not going to send large squishy creatures.
You mean meat bodies?
I think it's worthwhile doing that in the near term, because we learn a lot about biology, and so sending a human to the moon was a worthwhile project. We invented little things like the microchip, and but in terms of the exploration of the universe, I think then will be ultimately swarms of nanobots that can go close to the speed of light. So then the most strategic issue in the late this century will be, can we actually send information faster than the speed of light? And I've discussed some different scenarios where that might be possible. Actually, if you measure certain subatomic particles and how fast they go, there's a Gaussian distribution on their speed, so some appear to be going faster than the speed of light. There's some subtle phenomena that might indicate an ability to do that. And that's what engineering is all about, taking some subtle little capability and amplifying it, leveraging it. But that'll be a key question at the end of the century.
So a related key question that's being upvoted by the community, and it's a debate and a dialogue, and one of the we agree on 99, probably 0.9%, but one place we don't agree is the question of, are we alone in the universe? Is there intelligent life out there? And I'm going to make my argument first, if you would. And I believe that there is ubiquitous life. If that we're in a universe right now, some 14.7 billion years, and our planet began about 5 billion years ago. And that means that the universe had existed for some 10 billion years for round numbers. And if you look at the highest atomic number element in our body, let's call it like iodine, when did that come into existence through solar evolution? About 1 billion years after the Big Bang. So about 9 billion years of potential evolution. So the question, of course, asked is, okay, if life exists in the universe, where is it? Why haven't they come here? And my answer is that as a normal progression of life is going to be to enter the technological singularity, and at that point, the desire or interest to go to other planets is effectively meaningless. When you can create an infinite number of virtual worlds and explore them, why would you want to go and, go to conquer an Earth-like planet? It's senseless. It's like I don't communicate very often with the bacteria in the soil over there, even though they're there.
It does communicate with you, because we've got all these organisms inside us, but that's another issue.
Yeah.
But what you just said seems a little inconsistent with your passion for space and just the inherent intellectual challenge of discovering the world we live in, which I do think is a worthwhile
I do have a passion for space. I have to say my passion for space was disrupted only once when I read The Singularity is Near. I was like, God damn it. Because it was, the realization is that my passions for space are the intellectual adventures of what we're going to discover, the getting all of Earth's eggs out of one basket. It's, the eventual, I wanted to bring Star Trek to existence.
So I think there is the Fermi paradox, which you're well familiar with.
Yep.
The SETI, I support the SETI search, even if the result is negative, which so far it has been.
But we've looked at so little.
Yes and no. You have to, so we don't notice any intelligent life out there. And that's what the Fermi paradox is based on. And so one explanation is, okay, we look at so little, but you need to take into consideration the law of accelerating returns. That once a civilization reaches a technological sophistication of having radio or any kind of primitive electronic technology, it very quickly, within 100 years at most, develops the singularity. We will have gone from the fastest way to deliver a message on Earth being a pony to the singularity in the space of less than 2 centuries.
Yeah.
So, and these civilizations, if they exist, are not spread out over dozens of years. They're spread out over cosmological time, which is, as you just pointed out, billions of years.
Yeah.
So some other civilization, okay, if it's behind us, it doesn't matter, but if it's ahead of us, it's not ahead of us by 11 years. It's ahead of us by, 1 million years or 100 million years. And yet it only takes 100 or 200 years to jump from the most primitive electronic technology to exquisitely profound technology and actually being capable of galaxy-wide engineering. So it's not like we have to hunt for a tiny needle in a cosmic haystack. If they're doing galaxy-wide engineering, we should be noticing them just through their incidental communications. And yet we've been scouring the universe. It's not like we have to find this little needle. It should be gloriously evident to us. And the fact that it's not tells us something. That it's not a proof that they're not out there. There could be a civilization that is, in fact, 11 years ahead of us, and we wouldn't quite notice it.
But doubtful.
But, so I had this debate at the SETI Institute, and there's the Drake formula, which you're familiar with. Each of the many terms in that, there's a very wide range of plausible parameters you can put in there. The typical analysis is that there should be thousands to millions of intelligent civilizations per galaxy. I put in the singularities near, I cited that, but I also then put in some other reasonable assumptions, and you come up with 1.2 civilizations in our galaxy. We know of one. Yes, it's implausible that we would be in the lead, but somebody's got to be in the lead. And by the anthropic principle, if we weren't at this level, we wouldn't be talking about it. It's incredibly unlikely that our universe would exist with its standard model constants in exactly precise range within billionths of the measurement to allow evolution to exist, to have information encoding particles. And yet, again, if it weren't the case, we wouldn't be here talking about it. So somebody's got to be in the lead. My argument is that it's unlikely that there are other civilizations out there because they would be a million years ahead, and at that point they're vastly beyond the singularity. They'd be doing beyond galaxy-wide engineering, and we would notice them.
Let me bring it back to this planet and today. But I am curious where you guys what you guys think. Are we the first? Are we sort of nth on the prediction? Because the number of planets we're discovering are blowing us away. I mean, that's amazing. All right. On Tuesday, I'm spending an hour on stage with Mark Andreessen. He and I are doing a fireside chat on convergence of technologies. And one of the things that hit me when I first met Mark, Mark's the creator of Mosaic, as you know, and Netscape, is that what Mosaic really was early on was a user interface moment. There was this powerful thing called ARPANET, which connected the computers at MIT, at Harvard, or Stanford, and DC, but was only usable by certain terminals and so forth, and very limited, very complex interface protocols. And then he created something called Mosaic, which was allowed a user to interface very simply with it and build websites. And then on top of that user interface moment platform exploded hundreds of billions, if not trillions of dollars of value. And so I look and I teach at SU and Abundance Digital to look for user interface moments.
Trillions. I mean, just Apple and Google.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, I teach to look for user interface moments when a piece of software or capability lies on top of a complex system and then enables entrepreneurs to create tremendous wealth, right? The App Store on the Apple phones was a user interface moment. And it hits me that AI is going to be the ultimate user interface moment, that it allows you to interface with 3D printers, with CRISPR-Cas9 molecule. You don't have to know how CRISPR-Cas9 works. You could just talk, speak your desire.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts there?
Well, I think it's a good way to look at it because it makes everything feasible. People are talking about flying cars. People very often ask, where are the flying cars? And so they're coming, but they're only going to be feasible because of AI. Not everybody's going to want to learn to pilot a plane. I know you've gathered that skill, but so AI is going to fly it. It's going to navigate it. You'll just say where you want to go. It'll actually be easier than self-driving cars because there's more space up there to navigate. So it's easier to not get in an accident. But AI makes everything feasible. I think if you think about virtual and augmented reality, it hasn't quite had that user interface moment yet. It's
agreed.
Still cumbersome to use. It's hard to interact with. I mean, just as keeping up with technology, I've tried a number of them, and it's like, this is a pain to set up and to use. I think that's coming. I think we're in the hype phase of VR now.
Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah. I want to close on a broader human subject, which is, what do you think it means to be human?
Well, I think we are the species that changes who we are. So people say, oh, well, if some of our thinking is in the cloud, and that eventually becomes more powerful, and we're going to put devices inside our bodies that transform our health, are we still human? I don't think humans even have to be biological. I think humans are the species that changes who we are. We created technology. As soon as I had this tool that could reach fruit at a higher branch, that changed who I was. That tool is part of me. It's an extension of who we are. So we started a whole new evolutionary process. An evolutionary process led to humans, and then, in fact, if you look at the pace we talked about acceleration of change.
Yeah.
Mammals took tens of millions of years, and humanoids millions of years, and Homo sapiens hundreds of thousands of years. And then finally, this acceleration of evolution passed on in a very smooth fashion to technology. The first steps, like fire and stone tools and so on, took thousands of years, and now we see paradigm shifts in 1 year or less. But it's a very smooth transition from biology to technology. And so we are the technology creating species, but technology is an ability to change our environment, to change ourselves. We are going to profoundly transform ourselves, and people say, well, do I really want to become part machine? You're not even going to notice it, because it's going to be a sensible thing to do at each point. Just like you take a medicine that, it has some nanobots in it, keeps you healthy, you'd be stupid not to do it. And by the way, this has now this new feature. It'll improve your memory so you can recall things more easily, and it's just going to become a seamless process, as it has been. So that's who we are. We are the species that changes who we are to become smarter, more profound, more beautiful, more creative, more musical, funnier, sexier.
Amen. Amen. I love that. So listen, I hope you guys have enjoyed this. If you're part of the Abundance Digital community, you'll be joining Ray and I again at the end, January 21, 22, 23. We'll be spending a day together going deep into artificial intelligence, BCI, and another subject we haven't talked about, nanotechnology, right? And we're both we're both advisors and investors in nanotech company
we did mention nanobots.
Yeah. Anyway, we're going to have a lot of fun. I hope you've enjoyed this. Again, hello to the SU family and to the Futurism audience as well. And Ray, thank you, pal. Always a pleasure.
It's great to share ideas. Yeah. There's always more.
A lot more, and it's getting more abundant every day. See you guys.